Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Idaho has a problem with illegal immigration, but it's not the problem that you're thinking. The problem that Idaho is facing with illegal immigration is that there are certain industries, particularly within the ag sector, looking at farms and dairies and so forth, that more or less depend on illegal immigration, for their labor force. So it's a dilemma that is coming to a head. It's going to be addressed in Idaho, and we got some thoughts about what that might entail.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Once or twice a week, I like to get to sit down and go over some of the issues that are affecting us here in the Gem State. And illegal immigration is not just affecting us here in the Gem State, it's a major issue across the whole country. And not surprisingly, over the last 4 years, our immigration system and our border control has been weaponized to allow millions, maybe tens of millions of individuals into the country under dubious circumstances, to be generous, and under blatantly illegal circumstances, if we can just be blunt. But the problem is, while a lot of Americans actually voted for Donald Trump last fall because they wanted to see the border crisis addressed, they wanted to see an end to illegal immigration, and in terms of illegal immigrants coming and collecting benefits off the backs of the taxpayers, they didn't want to see the gangs coming in from Venezuela and so forth. They didn't want to see the crime. And it seems that the Trump administration has taken this rather seriously. But there's pushback at the state level, and it's coming from a very interesting place here in Idaho in that it's coming from the ag sector. Let's take a look at this headline here from KTVB. Check this out. Inside Ag, Idaho dairies brace for uncertainty amid new immigration enforcement threats. So first thing I have to ask is it's a threat. There's a law that's on the books and it's being enforced, but it's a threat, that is being enforced. Kind of interesting language that they choose to portray this. Who is it a threat to? Well, it's a threat to the continued hiring and employment of people who are not legally employable, nonetheless, or not even in the country illegally. So, we got a couple of levels of problems. Here's what the article has to say. Idaho is one of the top dairy producers in the country now, with a shift in immigration enforcement to where it's actually being enforced. Dairy leaders said the stakes are getting higher for farms, for food, and for all of us. Rick Narabout, who's CEO of the Idaho Dairy Association, said things are pretty uneasy right now. For decades, dairy leaders have asked Congress for something to help them legally hire the workers they depend on. Well, isn't that what E-Verify is for? And yet, I understand there are ways to game the system to where E-Verify is largely ineffective. But okay, so Congress, what can you do to help us? Many commodity groups in the ag industry expressed a breath of relief or a sigh of relief when the Trump administration directed immigration officers to pause arrests at farms, restaurants, and hotels after President Trump expressed alarm about the impact of aggressive enforcement. Now, he said, this was very optimistic for us. We thought that would give Congress a window of opportunity to be able to try to address our issues. Now, the article goes on to tell us there will be no safe spaces for industries who harbor violent criminals or who purposely try to undermine efforts. That's according to the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Worksite enforcement remains a cornerstone of our efforts to safeguard public safety, national security, and economic stability. For them to take a complete 180 and say, no, we're going to pull that back and we're going to go back to enforcement in these areas, well, Narabout says that's frustrating and it creates a lot of uneasiness within the agricultural communities. Now, I have to ask you this just to consider people who are here illegally. Now, and I'll grant you, there are some people who are here totally legally, but nonetheless are either wanted on criminal charges or avoiding criminal prosecution. The fact that they're here, should we just, turn a blind eye and let it go, right? Boys will be boys. Let bygones be bygones. Somehow that doesn't seem right. And yet, as you're going to see, this is really important to the Idaho ag industry. So much so, in fact, that they have some suggestions of, well, we would like to see a workable solution too, to make sure that we're following the law, but at the same time, we don't want to have to follow the law too closely. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. Now, Narrabout says Idaho hasn't seen the level of enforcement on Idaho dairies that we've seen, say, for instance, in Nebraska meat packing plants where, they'll take away 75 people at a time. But the threat of it and the uncertainty, Narrabout says, is enough to rattle farmers who don't even know which workers may be at risk. And again, I'm not trying to put salt in their wounds, but it's their job to know. If they're employing someone, it's their job as the employer to verify that that person is legally employable, especially after seeing how an ICE raid at a New Mexico dairy left them with just 20 of their 55 workers. And again, it's not that nobody will do the job. It's that when you have someone who is willing to work under the table, you don't have to worry about paying them whatever, the federally mandated minimum wage is. You can pay them whatever's convenient for both of you. And, if that means you're shortchanging them, what legal recourse do they have? Of course, I don't think that they would put it quite that way within the ag industry. Narrabout said producers are worried about their people. They're worried about their product and what will happen to the prices if it continues. Isn't that interesting? Well, if these people are rounded up under the name of immigration enforcement, your prices are going to go up on the food that you eat. Well, newsflash, they've already been going up, and it has nothing to do with, arresting the people who, either pick or process or milk, that particular commodity. It has to do with debasing the currency and has to do with monetary theory and so forth. But no, it's not directly just a matter of if you arrest these guys, you're going to pay more for milk. So what Narrabout says is if you see a concerted effort to have a lot of enforcement within agriculture, you will see food inflation. Again, this sounds more like a threat than a warning. You will see scarcity of products because just about any given day, 50% of the workers of all agriculture are here without status, so we can't feed ourselves as a nation without this workforce. And that certainly sounds like a worst case scenario. So here's what the Idaho Dairymen's Organization is calling for in terms of the need for competent, stable supply of labor on the dairy farms of Idaho. And they're looking for policies that would help them do their jobs, but not to do it in such a way that through immigration enforcement they would be interrupted. Look at the things that are highlighted here. They want a provision that allows immigrants currently employed or with recent employment history in the U.S. to earn the right to work legally. Look at that in the highlighted part, without having to exit the United States of America. Typically, if you're caught here illegally, you're deported and told come back the right way. So we want them to be able to stay. A provision that grants the immigrant worker's immediate family legal status to be with them in the USA. Again, all we want is for their families to be able to stay too if they're here illegally, and a provision finally that specifies the responsibility for ultimate verification of the legal status of a worker lies with the government, not the employers. Okay, so in summary, then, with these three addendums, the Idaho Dairymen's Organization is suggesting that sure, there's a workable way. We just need to figure out how to do it without actually having to send them home or their families home. And of course, we want to make sure that nothing interrupts their ability to continue to work for us. By the way, Matt Edwards had a great question here. Why hasn't the Idaho dairy and ag industry done a massive ad campaign and jobs fair looking for legal workers? Okay, the big immigration raids haven't been happening here, but he says they know what's coming. Maybe they better get on it. Just as a quick addendum too here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but be grateful that you have an attorney general who actually takes seriously the protection of the people from criminal gangs in particular, and the efforts to deport people who are here illegally, particularly members of the violent Tren de Aragua gang. Just give you a quick excerpt here from, this is Attorney General Raul Labrador's press release. The Attorney General announced that Idaho has joined a 25-state coalition in filing a friend of the court brief in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in support of Donald Trump's lawful use of executive authority to deport members of the Tren de Aragua violent Venezuelan gang designated as a foreign terrorist organization. The brief argues that the president is operating at the height of his constitutional and statutory authority under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, as well as the Alien Enemies Act, in removing foreign nationals affiliated with hostile organizations. So the brief makes the case this is not just a lawful use of power, but a necessary one in response to escalating violence across the nation tied to this Venezuelan gang. Attorney General Labrador said Idaho stands firmly with the president in his efforts to remove dangerous foreign criminals who threaten our communities. Tren de Aragua is a designated terrorist organization that spread violence and chaos across our nation, and the president has clear constitutional and statutory authority to protect Americans from these foreign threats. We will defend that authority in court. I like this last part here. The message of this coalition of states is very clear. Judicial overreach shouldn't interfere with the president's core duty to defend the nation. And the brief strongly urges the court to reject the injunction to allow federal authorities to continue removing dangerous illegal immigrants who do not belong in the country. And I think most reasonable people would agree with that. Now, do we want to grab everybody who speaks a different language or has an accent or different color skin? No, of course not. But there are a lot of violent people and unvetted people who may or may not be violent who've come across the border in the last few years. And it's probably in the interest of the American people to make sure that we have people here who deserve to be here and don't pose a threat. Look at all those states that have signed on. And Idaho has joined now all of these states in upholding the president's ability to deport those particularly violent people who are here illegally. Look, we can never forget that we are dealing with human beings. Okay, so to pretend that, well, these illegals, they're just insects whose lives, make our lives miserable, that's not a healthy way to look at things. But we also have rules and we have laws that do need to be addressed. And when those have been weaponized and used as a way to pad voter rolls or whatever reason it was for allowing tens of millions of people to cross that border without being vetted, without so much as a howdy do, except for here's your voter registration and here's where you can sign up for benefits. Yeah, the American people deserve something a little bit better. And here in Idaho, it appears we have leaders who are willing to work on it, even if some of the industries that depend upon illegal labor to carry out their work want to push back on it. I'm confident there are people who would work those jobs, but I'm also confident we need to follow the immigration laws. And frankly, it'll be interesting to see if there is a kind of showdown coming between Idaho's ag industry and those who would enforce immigration law. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.